really pleased to have Trish back several times. She's been with us. And for those of you who don't know her, I'll go through her biography, but I think most of you do. And it doesn't even touch half the stuff she's done. She was introduced to Confederate philately in history in 1965 and quickly became absorbed in exhibiting research and writing on the subject. As we know, in every journal I see, she has another article and can't wait to read it. She became a full-time professional philatelist in 1973 and today maintains an extensive online retail stock of Confederate stamps and postal history. She was editor-in-chief of the 2012 Confederate States of America catalog and handbook of stamps and postal history, editor of the Confederate Philatelist for 17 and a half years, and is a member of the emeritus of the Civil War Philatelic Authentication Services. Trish is past president of the Civil War Philatelic Society, served as chairman of the board of vice presidents for the American Philatelic Society from 2016 to 2022, and currently serves on the board of the Philatelic Foundation. She has written hundreds of articles on Civil War stamps and postal history. Most recent accolades include signing the role of Distinguished Philatelist in Southampton in England in July 24, acclaimed as the highest and most prestigious honor in philately. King George appears at the top as its first signatory. In May, she also received the Lichtenstein Memorial Award given by the Collectors Club of New York for her distinguished service in philately. And folks, this is just only the tips of the iceberg. There's a lot more there, especially with awards and accolades. So you'll know my enthusiasm. As I said, she's been with us several times and provided much knowledge and insight in the Confederate stamp issues, local and national, along with some great stories of the postal history. Some of the best philatelic days are when I get Trish's email agreeing to speak again once more to our stamp club. So please join me in welcoming Trish Kaufmann to the Philatelic Society for a presentation. And
appreciate that. And
if you can,
I go ahead to share screen.
Yep, share screen and the rest. Oh, Pat, Chris, do you want questions during or after? Does it matter?
It might be easier after, but I'm okay either way.
Okay, so if it's a burning question that they can, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, it is a delight to be with you again. I think I've been with you 5 or 6 times, sometimes in person and more recently after COVID by Zoom. It's been interesting. It's probably the only good thing that came out of COVID. For those very few of you who probably don't know what a cover is, it's the wrapping around a posted letter. And the term originated from the early practice of covering a letter by folding a separate sheet around it. And the term is interchangeable with envelope, as most of you do know. For the purposes of Civil War postal history, most specialized collectors begin with the secession of South Carolina from the Union on December 20th of 1860, although there are some who begin with the election of Abraham Lincoln. The first day of the Confederacy is recognized as February 4th, 1861, but that was only the beginning because they needed to develop a constitution and other things. So while that was the first day, it was just part. This is a cover on the lower right-hand corner from Montgomery, Alabama, that is postmarked February 4th of 1861, and that makes it, of course, a first day cover. Early on in the war, there was civil cooperation, which I can't imagine happening in today's world, but the South and the North were still getting along, sort of. In the meantime, the United States continued to provide postal service in the seceded states with the U.S. postage rates still in effect, and that was until June 1st of 1861. However, there were some Confederate postmasters who really didn't like that idea of remitting funds to the U.S., so they decided to make their own stamps. And the first one of these is the Madison Courthouse 1861 3-cent. And you see at the upper left a You can't quite make it out, but what it is paid in money in manuscript that was used to cancel the stamp. There is only one of them known on cover. That is shown at the right, and the date line for the letter is above it. From the time a state seceded from the Union until the time it joined the Confederacy, it was considered an independent state. And Virginia, in this particular case, was only independent for 20 days. Virginia seceded on April 17th of 61 and joined the CSA May 7th. This is a star die envelope, US, of course, and it was in use at that time through till June 1st. This is one of my favorite covers. It is in the collection of Van Coppersmith, or was until recently. And you see up at the upper right-hand corner, a 3-cent 1857 US stamp, and it's postmarked June 1st, that magic date. However, it's not recognized, and the paid 5 is the new Confederate rate. So for the first time possible, we have this wonderful first day of use. Confederate postage stamps were not offered to the public until mid-October. So consequently, postmasters reverted to the stampless practices of the 1840s and either hand-marked the mail with hand stamps or by manuscript. This particular one is a re-rated hand-stamped college advertising cover addressed to CSA Vice President Alexander Stephens. You'll note that there's a 10 stamped over the 5, and that's because it was over 500 miles, and the rate doubled if that happened. Really small towns simply wrote the town name, the state, the date, and the rate on their outgoing envelopes and didn't have hand stamps. This rather plain use is from Belfast Mills, Virginia. This is a very inexpensive area to collect and very popular because most of these very small towns no longer exist. I have more than one person I work with who collects ghost towns, and this is an area ripe for that. Of course, a lot of other Southern postmasters decided to prepare their own postage stamps too, but they were mostly after June 1st and not before. Stamps were theoretically valid only in the towns in which they were produced, but they are occasionally found used unchallenged from other towns. These two are the 2-cent and the 5-cent from Memphis, Tennessee. The provisionals come in all different shapes and sizes. One of my favorites is the Coleman and Law that you see here from Gonzales, Texas. And I don't know if you can read it, but what it is a book label. There's nothing that has a rate on it. It is simply a book label, and that's what they used for postage stamps. Also, you might note the Greenville, Alabama, and the Baton Rouge, Louisiana are bicolored stamps, and they were the first bicolored stamps in North America. The US and Confederate postage rates, of course, began with the 3-cent US rate up until June 1st. Then the 5-cent rate started on June 1st, and it was for a ½ ounce. And letters traveling more than 500 miles were doubled, as you saw with the re-rated cover. On July 1st, a little over of 1862, a little over a year later, the postage rate was raised to a universal rate of 10 cents for all distances, and this went on for all the war. The 2-cent rate was for commercial mail or letters to be picked up at the local post office, which we call drop letters. The first Confederate postage stamp was a portrait of Confederate President Jefferson Davis. And as we find out from the Richmond Daily Examiner newspaper of the time, that was when the first stamps were recognized and issued. The same design was printed later in blue due to the difficulty in procuring green ink. All Confederate stamps are issued imperforate, although there are a few that were experimentally perforated, and they usually command good prices at auction. I spent virtually all day sitting on my rear at Siegel auction today, and the prices were extraordinary. It went 73.6% over estimate for prices, which is something we haven't seen in a while. That's really good pricing. Other Confederate general issues were some of the Confederate States' heroes, which were, not surprisingly, U.S. heroes. A son of the South, Thomas Jefferson, was the subject of the second Confederate adhesive, as you see here. And as with the first general issue, the color was changed from blue to rose. Other Southern heroes on Confederate stamps were Andrew Jackson, George Washington, and John C. Calhoun. At this time, there were 3 printing processes in the world, and they were lithography and typography and engraving. And the Confederacy was very unusual in that it used all 3. On the left, you'll see what we call the London print. That's because it was ordered from Thomas de la Rue and Company in London, England, and ran the Blockade with the printing plates, the paper, the ink, and the gum. But when that ran out, then Richmond used the printing plates to make new stamps. And unfortunately, as you can see, it's rather crude compared to the really nice London print. So that didn't last long, mainly because the Blockade just was impossible. One of the printing plates that was captured is what we call the lost plate, although that's a misnomer. The lost plate, we knew where it was all along. But it was purchased from Philadelphia and sold to the National Postal Museum in Washington, D.C., where it's on display now. They finally moved to engraving as the best option of the 3 for printing. What's unusual with this is that the same portrait of Andrew Jackson was used both by the North and the South. The Confederacy had a slight jump on the issuance of it, but I'm sure the blackjack is probably more familiar to you than the red jack, but it's essentially the same portrait. CSA 9 is known as the TEN, and it's TN for the obvious reason the value is spelled out instead of being in numerals. The legend is that Verena Davis, Jefferson Davis's wife, didn't like the portrait because she thought it looked like Abraham Lincoln and asked for it to be discontinued. More likely, the copper plate that was produced as a trial experiment because it was well known that copper plates did not wear well. The frame line stamp that you see here is actually the most difficult of off-cover issues to get. There are very few large multiples, and this is one of them. The distinguishing feature, of course, is the incised lines that were used as guidelines for making the transfer. You may notice that the stamp on the left bears an uncanny resemblance to the frame line. That's because it was actually printed with the same plate. They burnished out the frame lines, and here you have this. You'll also notice that it's much darker, and that is because these were printed by Keating and Ball in Columbia, South Carolina, and they had darker ink, almost always this deep blue, as opposed to the earlier ones from Archer and Daly in Richmond that were blue and greenish blue and all sorts of intermediate shades. And then the type 2 is a little bit different. You'll notice the closed-in frames, and there's a difference in the hairline and in the beard, and some other things as well. It's one of those more difficult things for newer collectors to figure out which is type 1 and which is type 2. In the US, there was rather a furor because the US Postal Service was very concerned about the Confederacy using postage to aid the rebellion, selling it, taking it across lines and selling it in the North. So therefore, they rendered US postage worthless by demonetizing it. There were more than 104 million new stamps printed by the National Banknote Company. The old stamp on the right, the 1857 issue, is no longer valid for postage, and the new stamp is the one you see on most Civil War mail. The portraits are not identical, but they are both of George Washington, and the color is sort of similar as well. This is also true with the Ben Franklin, which is the 1 cent blue in the US. And the first new stamps were available in late August of 1861. They only gave patrons 6 days to exchange the old for the new stamps before the old ones became invalid. Postmasters were supposed to accept letters with old stamps from other post offices at set dates ranging from December of 61 for letters coming from the far west. This is, again, one of my favorite covers. I love things that have 2 different stamps on one envelope. You'll see the old 1857 stamp on the right and the new 1861 on the left. This is only a day apart. It was posted in Chicago on October 22nd. They advertised it in the newspaper, and the patron went back in and paid for a new stamp so that his letter could go on to Detroit. The held for postage and old stamps not recognized are very desirable rate markings that you see commonly at this time. Other special hand stamps were dead letter office, mail suspended and sent back to England without a reason for non-delivery. But the most popular of all is the Southern letter unpaid. The postmaster was told to forward mail postage due after removing the stamps, and as for his own convenience, the postmaster of Louisville created the coveted Southern letter unpaid hand stamp. One of the most popular areas is Patriotics, and this is on both the North and the South. This is one of only 2 recorded transatlantic uses on a Confederate patriotic. The South lacked the North's industrial advantages and was short of paper and printing supplies. Therefore, Confederate patriotics are much scarcer and highly valued by collectors. Designs range from flags to cartoons and battle scenes. There are only about 200 different Confederate designs compared to thousands of Union designs. Here are examples of more Confederate ones. These particular ones are fairly colorful, but the majority are more black and white and less red, white, and blue. They did have what's exciting to collectors, and that's regimental imprints or slogans, and those are very collectible as well. But the most famous of the Confederate patriotics is the Hanging Lincoln. It's the iconic Confederate design. Only 12 covers with this design have been recorded. One of the several verses asserts, Abe Lincoln the Destroyer, he once split rails, now he has split the Union. This was sold in December of 2013 by Siegel for more than $50,000. Union patriotics tended to be much more colorful and more attractive. Often they come with fantastic travels. You can see that this one's from Belgium to New York. But this is certainly one of my favorites. It's a campaign cover, but they're collected just like patriotics. And obviously Fremont did not win the presidency. But this cover goes from Cincinnati to Gibraltar, it's forwarded to Barbados, New York credit date stamp, and various transit markings that include London, France, and Spain. It's a gorgeous cover. Columbia Rules the Ocean is another patriotic design, this one going from Philadelphia to Poughkeepsie, New York. Columbia was a popular nickname in the U.S. at the time, an Americanization for England's Britannia. One of my favorite series of Union patriotics is the 5 rounds. It's very rarely seen in full color like this. This is ex-George Malpas, who was a big Confederate collector and U.S. collector of patriotics in the 1950s. And he wrote a lot in the Weekly Philatelic Gossip, if you're familiar with that. This particular one is the 5th round. And as you can see, since it's the last round, Lincoln wins. Hand illustrated patriotics are popular both north and south. This one is from Washington. And although this is technically after the war, I couldn't help but include it, the wonderful patriotic morning covers. Confederate adversity covers are some of the most collectible items in Confederate collecting. Watched all day as incredible adversity covers were sold today for huge amounts of money. If you ask what's an adversity cover, basically it's the adverse conditions in the South, which were caused by the blockade. So there were shortages of paper and a lot of other things. As Anna Simpson says in her memoir here, a favorite knight's employment was found in making envelopes. No bits of white paper suitable for writing with pen and ink could be wasted in envelopes. Thus it happened that wallpaper and sheets with pictures on one side served to make envelopes. These we stuck together with gum from peach trees. Unquestionably, wallpapers are the most popular category of adversity covers. I watched some of them today. When I first started collecting, they might have cost $200. More recently, they've gone for 5 figures at a time, just incredible amounts of money. And you wonder how they're priced. It's all in the aesthetics and what your personal taste is. Some people like them the more garish and geometric possible, and others prefer beautiful florals. I wouldn't have this on my walls for anything. Another sort of adversity are the 20-cent green bisects. There was one cover today in the Siegel sale that was 2 bisects, which were used, of course, for 10-cent stamps, that were put back together on a cover. They were 2 different shades, obviously 2 completely different stamps, but they were put back together to make a 20-cent rate. So postal history is always interesting. Adversity, another sort, is turn covers. People did what they had to find sources of paper. So envelopes were used twice or more by turning them inside out and reusing the other side. One today in the Siegel sale was used 3 times, and Siegel's staff said it was the only one they had ever seen, and I can't think of another one myself either. Advertising covers, another section that went absolutely nuts in the sale today. This was, of course, on both sides, although most of the Confederate advertising covers were probably pre-war and were still around being used. In this particular case, we see the black and white, but in fact, the black designs are more common in the South. This is a spectacular Adams Express US cover, multicolored advertising from the New York office of Adams Express showing an express wagon loaded with packages. Prisoners of war certainly strike a chord with almost anybody. This is an example of a north to south cover, and it illegally bears the postage of both sides. I say illegally because military regulations called for 2 envelopes, respectively stamped with each country's postage. The outer envelope was supposed to be discarded at the exchange point, but to our great delight, sometimes it's overlooked. This is a south to north POW from the infamous Andersonville prison, which most of you, I'm sure, are familiar with. Manuscript marking at the arrow is that of the infamous prison commander, Captain Henry Wirtz, who was hanged for war crimes in November of 1865. This particular prisoner of war was from Captain Coleman. He was a prisoner at both Cahaba and Andersonville, and he survived the horrors of war to die along with 1,200 to 1,800 other souls on the Sultana, which blew up in the middle of the night on April 27th, 1865. Unfortunately, it was very, very overloaded and had countless recently released prisoners of war on it. So they survived the war on their way home and disappeared in the mighty Mississippi. This is the most spectacular of all Confederate homemade Valentines. If there was ever a wow Valentine, this is it. It's patriotic, it's artistic, it's a soldier's letter. It's got a great stamp on it. What a lucky guy this soldier was. This is one of the most popular Union Valentines. It's known as the Romeo and Juliet Valentine, and sometimes Romeo here has been changed to be a Union soldier. They pretty much leave the woman the same, and this comes in somewhat different colors and shades. Usually, but not always, the flag draped tent is the Valentine enclosure. If we close the 2 flaps, they have a flag on them. You can probably see through the paper to see that, but that is the usual duo. Blockade mail is also extremely popular. This particular letter was dated from Liverpool, and the routing instructions were per Scotia. Scotia left Liverpool in November of 1863 and arrived in New York on December 4th, where it was sent to Nassau in the Bahamas. And then the blockade runner Siren left Nassau December and arrived in Wilmington December 16th on one of her 33 successful trips. It was the most made by any Civil War vessel. Outgoing blockade covers are much more scarce, as you might imagine, because incoming, we know as philatelists what we have on this side, but I venture to say that most of the European collectors really don't know what they're looking at if they're seeing a cover on the other side of the Atlantic. So it's much harder to find outgoing blockade covers. This is the only recorded example of the 1863 Bahamas sixpence used on a blockade run cover. Trans-Mississippi Express route is a very popular one. This is the earliest use of the government express, which began in October of '63 at a quite high rate of 40 cents to deliver the mail across the Mississippi in either direction. And of course, this was a dangerous undertaking. They transmitted the mail under very difficult situation, usually in dead of night. So kudos to Postmaster General John Reagan from Texas. He was such a masterful executive that under his supervision, the Confederate Post Office Department actually made a profit. That's really kind of an incredible achievement in view of the conditions in the wartime South. Even the Union officials were impressed. He was offered a job at the end of the war to take over the U.S. Post Office, but he declined. This slide program is made for the Civil War Philatelic Society. The Civil War Philatelic Society encourages original research, such as this book here, which is Special Mail Routes of the American Civil War, a guide to Across the Lines Postal History by Steve Walsky and Scott Treppel. And of course, the Pièce de Résistance is the CSA catalog, so-called, which is the Confederate States of America catalog and handbook of stamps and postal history. It was sold out in 3 months. The society sometimes goes as far afield as another country. We've only done that once. I was there and it was a blast. I was in May of 2015. Had a great time, lots of tours that were philatelically inclined, of course, the Royal Philatelic Society and so forth. There are also mid-year rendezvous, which we hold in smaller cities and towns in a more casual atmosphere, often near Civil War areas where we can take tours. Awards by CWPS include awards for exhibiting, research and writing, and service to the society. Civil War Philatelic Society website is really a wealth of information. It's accessible to virtually all. The only thing that is for members only is the last 3 years of the Civil War Philatelist or the Confederate Philatelist, which that isn't relevant anymore because it doesn't exist. Resources, important censuses, and other valuable assistance are available through the website. Authentication service offering expert analysis of stamps and covers at a discount for members, a mentor program, convention highlights, past award winners, history of the society, news and upcoming events, and so much more. Ask me for a membership application, be glad to send you one, and come join us. Any questions?
Can we please have an amazingly loud round of applause for Trish Kaufmann? I am still reeling from what you have just shared with us.
Thank you.
Just amazing. Please, I just want to say thank you, Trish.
My pleasure.
I learn something new every time you give us a lecture, so I say thank you. Any questions from the audience, please, the floor is yours.
I'll start off, I guess. I don't know how you can pick a favorite. I was looking at everyone, said I'd love one of those. You know, one of my bucket lists, there's certain covers I'd like to have, and one of them has been a wallpaper cover, but I think after tonight I realize I'll have to win a lot of that. But thank you.
Well, Just don't buy them at auction.
That's that's the issue. But you know, when you showed the about with Adams Express, a little research from Stan Jones, who's here tonight, he found that the Adams Express Company in the North, it covered the United States, and in 1854, they sent down a gentleman to run the southern end of the business, which he did. The war came, and all of a sudden they renamed it as the Southern Express Company.
That's right.
They were running the southern end, and Adams the north. But you know, there's always a catch to it. Even though both sides worked, the people in the north were a little disappointed that their Adams company would recognize a southern company, and the same thing in the south, that our Southern Express Company is part of a northern, you know, conspiracy. But they, as I understand it, they both survived the war. And
Right.
yeah, very interesting. But thank you, folks. Questions?
Yes, I have one.
Mhm.
Trish, are you familiar with any covers that may have been canceled in or out of Bermuda? Because
Oh, yeah.
Bermuda was a hot spot.
Yes.
You're
Yeah,
not familiar with any?
there are, oh, I've forgotten the number now, but well, I won't hazard a guess, but there are numerous known from Bermuda. They're not super common, but they are out there, and maybe I will hazard a guess. I'm going to guess 20 plus from
Mhm.
Bermuda, and they have been exhibited. David Corden of Bermuda has an exhibit that he got grand awards with and so forth. So yes, they definitely are out there.
Thank you.
Now we'll tell Twilly to put that on your wish list.
Yes.
Yes,
The
indeed.
Bermuda collection. That would be a nice addition. Other questions, comments?
Trish, I got a question, but I think I know the answer. I mean, there was a fair amount of the 3-cent 1857s that were left over, right, in
Right.
Southern Post Office, right? And they weren't used. We know that they weren't used. And post-war, right, many of those were still in drawers, right? And a lot of those post offices,
Right.
they weren't legal tender. And I think
Correct.
fair to say a lot of those found their way, these unused complete panes, right, into, fortunate for a number of us 3-cent aficionados, collectors' hands, which I think from a Dr. Chase perspective really aided in some of the plating that was done, right, in those early days that you had access to large multiples that really
No
just was
question.
sitting, right? True. That's the true statement, right, Trish?
Absolutely true.
Trish, I know Conrad Bush. He's a Confederate States collector, and actually I've done some business with him decades ago. He lived in Fort Walton Beach
Right.
while I was working on and off as a consultant for the Air Force. And so I had an opportunity to do some business with him.
And of course, he was Air Force, as I'm sure you're aware.
What's that?
He was an Air Force colonel as well.
Yes, he was. Yeah,
And he
I
died a few
know that.
years ago.
Yeah. But he used to do stamp shows in Fort Walton Beach, but he was always on the prowl for Confederate States
Yep, he was.
information.
Yeah, he was our fancy cancel guy. Straight line cancels and anything unusual is what he was after, and he showed quite successfully as well.
Yeah, he was a nice guy. I liked him.
He was.
Sure. So I have another follow-up question too. But really from, once the post office CSA was set up, right? And I mean, they were under rough conditions, right, to get access, as we know, to inks, paper, I mean, all of
Right.
that, right? And, and there were a lot of blockade runners that were trying to bring in a myriad of things just to
Right.
keep the South going. I mean, the post offices and the clerks had to pivot, right? So they were clearly making some of their own CDSs, I guess, right? Circular date stamps.
Well, and some of them managed to
Or
get
no.
people down from the U.S.
Yeah.
from the National Banknote Company and so forth. They stole some people away and
Right.
managed to get people, but that didn't help them with the supplies.
Right.
You know, so there were all kinds of ink and gum problems and paper problems, and it was a mess from that direction. And they weren't, you know, they didn't take the creme de la creme from those companies. So, you know, yes, they had people who knew how to do it, but they weren't the best of the best.
Fair. And I guess same would go for even just producing envelopes and their advertising covers and all of that, right? You know, unless you
Right.
had a supply coming from a northern printer in one of the
Right.
northern cities, right? You would just crudely trying to make what you could to correspond right across the southern states.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Trish, do you know what Postmaster Reagan did after the war, after turning down DC,
He was a senator for a while, but that I want to say that was all before the war.
Okay.
I'd have to go recheck my history.
Yeah, I don't. There's so many people to know their backgrounds and things.
Right.
Anything
I mean, he was very well known when he was appointed as Postmaster General. So, but he was well known as a Texas senator.
Okay, okay, yeah, that's good.
Trish, I'm the Brit here.
All right. You
So
might
this
know
is
a little bit about
this is
Bermuda.
this is an absolutely fascinating topic and a wonderful presentation. I'm curious, did much mail go from the south to the north and north south?
Yes, they had boats that literally were on rivers, and they met in the middle of the river and
Okay.
exchanged mail. And with the prisoner of war mail, I mean, literally they exchanged the mail, and
Uh-huh.
the stamp that had just done its duty was supposed to be ripped off, and then there was another envelope that went on with the proper. So if it was going, say, from north to south, they might meet in the James River,
Mhm.
and the U.S. stamp and envelope were discarded, and the inner envelope is what traveled on with either postage due hand stamp for soldier's due, which meant the wife or the mother or whoever would pay for it, or there somehow they managed to get stamps. So you'll often find letters that say, please send me stamps, you know, looking to their loved ones to send them stamps.
Mhm. Okay. Was there follow-up? Was this done in the dead of night or it was
No, that was pretty wide open. I mean, everybody
okay.
knew what was going on.
Okay, so they weren't
That wasn't
attacked.
surreptitious, but there was covert mail. There is so very much that I did not cover here. You know, because you can only show a little bit
Yeah. So
just to get a flavor of it.
was there any commercial mail, or was it mostly prisoner of war and
They pretty much tried to squash that. So there was civilian flag of truce mail, but it was a harder gig. They
Mhm.
really didn't want to let that go on.
Mhm.
Early in the war, they did use the express companies to get commercial mail back and forth, but they really didn't want that to happen. So it was
Yeah.
primarily prisoner of war, but there was some commercial, a little bit of civilian traffic.
Okay. Thanks,
Not
Trish.
so much commercial as just
Yes.
civilian.
Trish,
Yeah.
was there censorship? And if so, what was it like?
Oh yeah, there was censorship, and I've actually had some interesting discussions with friends on this who said, "Oh, there was no such thing," and I've very seriously proven there was such a thing, although it wasn't as well documented as, say, in World War II, what have you. But there was censorship, and you could tell this from the letters that were sent across the lines, and that was letters saying, Sally, don't say anything about this because they open our mail. So we know they opened the mail. And this was true with, say, Army of Northern Virginia, that we know for sure. Because I've seen the letters, I mean, and more than one. And how widespread, I think it was very widespread.
Mhm.
Thank you. Were there markings and things, or just resealed, or?
Yeah, I think the mail was unsealed.
Okay.
Primarily, and then maybe it was sealed at the end. But mind you, they're having to, with a 2 envelope system, they have 2 envelopes. I'm sure it was unsealed as far as the first go round, totally, and then the second one probably was sealed.
Okay, thank you.
Trish, I know you
Trish,
didn't cover it. I have another question if I could ask, because, we know that specie was, coinage was really also rare, not north, south, right? And postage currency then became in.
Right,
For a short amount of time, North, American National Banknote Company came together. They pushed out a fair amount. Stamps were legal tender in addition to
right.
being used on. So similar didn't happen though, right in the South, and there is no record of postage currency per se, or even any of that making its way, and it wouldn't have been legal
There's
tender,
a
right?
little bit,
Oh no,
you find it in the Confederate currency dealers.
yeah,
There was some,
Mhm.
but that's not so much my area, so I don't feel terribly comfortable discussing it. But there definitely was such, and little towns and script and such. There definitely was.
Okay, thank you, appreciate it.
But encased postage.
Yeah, that was all U.S. end of
So,
things.
okay, okay.
Trish, Paul and I put together a paper about a very famous stamp forger. Did any of these very famous stamp forgers get involved in forging Confederate states?
Oh, yes, they did, beginning in 1862. Right during the war, the beginning of the war, no less. Though S. Allen Taylor, which if you're familiar with forgeries, I'm
Our
sure,
article was about S. Owen Taylor.
yeah, I mean, he's probably maybe the best known in that era. But fakes and forgeries and fantasies are some of my favorite areas. And just got done writing an article on Oneglia, if you're familiar with him, who was Italian, and worked with Sperati, among others, Pinelli and so forth. So yeah, there were quite a few.
S. Allen Taylor was probably the most colorful one of all of them.
For sure. He put out a lot of product.
Or he was, as a matter of fact, I had a small collection of locals that was just one stockbook page, and I had 2 of his forgeries in that lot. I had no more than 20 stamps, and I had 2 of his, which shows you how prolific he was.
Right. Well, I guess Fournier in Europe was probably the worst. He literally produced millions, which is insane to think. But and a long time ago. I mean, 1800s. So they started it early.
I've heard when stamps came out in 1840, there were already forgery manuals by the end of the 1840s. Because
Yeah,
every little town had its own printer and engraver, and why not give it a shot? I mean, we got a photocopier when the kids were little. We were homeschooling, and the day it came and it was set up, before I got home, they had already printed and hand colored and pasted both sides of dollar bills. Okay,
Wow.
15 and a 10-year-old. So, and they actually look pretty good. So, other questions, folks? Going once, going twice. Well, good. Well, thank you. Thank you very much,
Thank
Trish.
you, Trish.
Yes. And
Thank you,
what we usually
Tricia.
do is we open this now to show and tell. And you're welcome to stay with us, or as I said in an email, if you have something you want to show us of interest, we'd be glad to have it. And do we have anybody who does want to screen share?
I think I'm actually going to say goodbye now because I've been sitting in this
I am
chair
too.
since 9 o'clock this morning.
Well, we thank you very much, Trish. We always do. We always look forward to it. And we will be in touch.
Okay, well,
Good
thank you
thing.
so much for having me.
And we do an exchange. So if any of your clubs ever need a speaker, you know, we have a lot on the books that we can.
Excellent.
Sure.
Yeah, I think Dennis would probably like to hear about that for
Yeah,
sure.
we're on the, you know, it's easy to be on the road. So yeah, Dennis, let us know. And they can
Yeah.
see what we have on our website.
We haven't done, very honestly, we haven't done a whole bunch of videos on our side. But I'll work with Mike. Mike O'Reilly, our VP, is the webmaster, and he knows a little bit more about than I do. But
Mhm.
yeah, we'll definitely take you up on that. Look for
Yeah.
opportunities. Thank you.
Although surely. Okay, hey, Charlie, you're waving your hands.
Yeah,
thank-
reach out to me anytime, Dennis, on, you know,
Just-
website, the video, all of that. Just
Yeah.
I'm maintaining all of that for the society. So just let me
Cool.
know. That's not a
Thank
problem.
you.
Perfect.
When we see you waving your hands, you either bought a horse or you have something to share with us.
Yeah,
on
I bought a horse. Yeah, I bought a Confederate horse. Just thinking, that was just amazing. Just an amazing presentation.
It is. It's a
Yeah.
great topic.
Thank you.
Other any show and tell, folks? Any news for the good of the society? Everybody wants to get home. Well, we do want to say special thank you to those who are in the Civil War Collector Society. It was great to have you. Let us know if you want to be on our friends mailing list. We'll be glad to do so. And again, we thank
you for
Trish
having
very
us and
much.
giving us a chance to participate.
Yep, our pleasure. Anything else, Charlie? Are we good?
I think we're great. I just want to again say thank you to everybody, to our society, our friends, our members, our visitors as well. Just you know, and you're always welcome, as Paul said. I'll echo that, and just reach out to any one of us, and we'll be happy to work with you on anything, vice versa. So I just say again, thank you. Thank you,
And
Paul.
Charlie, as host, can you leave this on for a while after everybody leaves?
Yeah, absolutely,
I'm gonna catch up a little business here.
absolutely.
Okay, well, thank you, folks.
Thank you,
We'll
everyone.
we'll
Goodbye.
see you in October. Good
Thanks,
night.
everyone.
Thank you.
Good night, all.
Night,
Night.
night.